Greetings everybody, and thank you for joining me in this video. Today, as promised, we are going to review the presentation, The Story of Stuff. Probably will take a couple of videos. And we'll discuss the manipulation techniques presented there. What comes immediately to mind is lies by omission, lies by structure, and also presenting opinion and conclusions as if they are facts. So we are going to shortly go over this. But before we get going, why is the story of stuff so important? It is important because this presentation has been seen by 11 million people, many of whom children in the public schools of the United States and Canada. This presentation appears in science classes for 6th grade, and little kids without the knowledge to detect lies by omission or to realize what's going on when presented to them fall easy prey to activist teachers. So let's get going. The first, who is Annie Leonard, the lady who will lead this presentation for us? Let me open it for you here. And it shows Annie Leonard, born 1964, is an American proponent of sustainability and a critic of consumerism. Very interesting. She created the animated film The Story of Stuff, 2007. Important, we were going to talk about 2007 when we verify some of the data she presents, which describes the life cycle of material goods. In 2014, she became the executive director of Greenpeace USA. Greenpeace. What is Greenpeace? Let's find out. Greenpeace is known for their methods of protesting and for their position. Clearly biased and definitely not belonging to one in the public classroom. Whether you agree with what they stand for is a separate issue. What matters here is we have a highly biased presenter bringing information to children at school as if it is a pure fact. With that in mind, let's continue further.
Do you have one of these? I got a little obsessed with mine. In fact, I got a little obsessed with all my stuff. Have you ever wondered where all the stuff we buy comes from and where it goes when we throw it out? I couldn't stop wondering about that, so I looked it up. And what the textbook said is that stuff moves through a system from extraction to production to distribution to consumption to disposal. All together, it's called the materials economy. Well, I looked into it a little bit more. In fact, I spent 10 years traveling the world, tracking where our stuff comes from and where it goes.
One thing comes in mind here, a claim to expertise. Traveling the world for 10 years does not increase or decrease one's ability to know how market economy works or how stuff, as she likes to call it, is produced. Often you see people, both in politics, academia, presentations, and so on. Sometimes they bring a long list of things that they have done, which actually are not necessary to the subject matter they are discussing. Let's continue.
And you know what I found out? That is not the whole story. There is a lot missing from this explanation. For one thing, this system looks like it's fine. No problem. But the truth is, it's a system in crisis.
The first big word, instilling fear.
And the reason it's a system in crisis is it's a linear system and we live on a finite planet. And you cannot run a linear system on a finite planet indefinitely.
Interesting proposition. However, please note, she does not define what a linear system is. And neither we can be sure that the 6th graders who watch this know. If you ask a mathematician, a linear system is a system of equations. They're all linear equations. But I don't think this is what she has in mind. We may guess what she means, but the thing is, she allows us to use our own guesses. Different members of the public, different members of the audience will come to different conclusions as to what linear system is, and she does not do anything to clarify that fact. In other words, she may be encouraging us to lie to ourselves.
Every step along the way, this system is interacting with the real world.
Another interesting technique here. When saying something it is true because there is no system that does not interact with the real world. There is no such thing unless we just talk about some computer modeling. And by saying something that it is true may confuse the audience that what you say in general, including your conclusions, is also true.
In real life, it's not happening on a blank white page. It's interacting with societies, cultures, economies, the environment. And all along the way, it's bumping up against limits. Limits we don't see here because the diagram is incomplete. Fill in some of the blanks and see what's missing. Well, one of the most important things that's missing is people. Yes, people. People live and work all along this system.
Interestingly, she's the one who presents this diagram and this model. Why take people out just in order then make a big fuss of putting them back in? How does this present the information more clearly to the kids?
And some people in this system matter a little more than others. Some have a little more say. Who are they? Well, let's start with the government. Now, my friend...
Some charged language here. We were talking about presentation to children in science. Now we are glossing over social concepts that may take a lot to debate about, which is definitely not the place in science.
Friends tell me I should use a tank to symbolize the government, and that's true in many countries and increasingly in our own. After all, more than 50% of our federal tax money is now going to the military.
Pause. What do you think a 12-year-old, when seeing that picture, would think about? Oh my God, 50% of our money goes to the military. This is why probably we don't have food on the table. Sounds reasonable. Maybe. Let me open up something here for you, and let's look, because this presentation was made in 2007, let's see how accurate Miss Leonard is. So, this is the pie chart of the federal spending in 2007. If we see defense takes about 1/4, and it is 6,053 billion. One thing to keep in mind is that under defense, there are subcategories that include various things such as taking care of the veterans. So even if you demolish all your military, you will still have defense spending because you'll be taking care of the veterans of all wars and all years of active service. Another issue here is the second pie chart, as you can see, the revenue, which is 5.17 trillion. Maybe according to Miss Leonard, 600 billion is like 1/2 of the 5, which is not. And even if you look at the income taxes, income taxes, which is 1.9 trillion, that 600 billion is more like 1/3. But keep in mind, income taxes is only a fraction of the total revenue. That includes the social security tax, which is called here social insurance, and ad valorem. What is ad valorem? This is just the tariffs that imported goods are charged with. So see how she picked just a fraction of the US income and compared that to military spending, thus confusing kids that we spend a larger fraction of our income or our disposable money on the military than actually we do, which, by the way, is very common technique used both in politics and academia. Whether or not we think that there should be less military spending is of no relevance here. What matters here that children are being lied to the tune of a 2-3x regarding the existence of a problem. And if you have to lie, then your position is probably not too strong. Let's continue.
But I'm using a person to symbolize the government because I hold true to the vision and values the government should be of the people, by the people, for the people.
This phrase sounds very familiar and has been used as a rallying cry of some political movement usually associated with the so-called left. This does not belong to the classroom, but there is more.
It's the government's job to watch out for us, to take care of us.
This is absolutely not the government job. it is impossible for the government to do that. And that would be a separate video about that. Down the line, there is a lot to talk about. But the government job is to regulate the relationship between the people so that to allow people to do the best for themselves and others. This is very long discussion, and just we're not going to stop here about this to discuss this point here, except to state that what she says is both politically manipulative and also impossible, the government to take care of us. And finally, it seems that she does not understand what the function of a government is, and she's passing that confusion to little children who later may fall prey to manipulative politicians who repeat these buzzwords. So parents, watch out.
That's their job. Then along came the corporation. Now, the reason the corporation looks bigger than the government is that the corporation is bigger than the government. Of the 100...
The vast majority of corporations are not. Second, why does it matter whether corporation is big or small? To discuss what a corporation is, yes, we'll take another long video which is not part of this discussion. But please note how many quick topics Miss Leonard jumps from one to another without giving any time for the listener, let alone the little kids, to actually pause for a moment and think. We were just filling a tank with 50% of our revenue, tax revenue, just a few seconds ago. Now we are looking at some monopoly men here and talking that the government is supposed to take care of us.
100 largest economies on Earth now, 51 are corporations. And as the corporation has grown in size and power, we've seen a little change in the government where they're a little more concerned in making sure everything's working out for those guys than for us. Okay, so let's see what else is missing from this picture. We'll start with extraction, which is a fancy word for natural resource exploitation, which is a fancy word.
Exploitation, a very charged word usually related to Marxism and talking about a worker-proprietor relationship, completely ignoring the fact that often the proprietor also works. And there are many other things. We're going to talk in this channel a lot about economy and this manipulation. That's probably will be like 30% of what we'll be doing. But for now, let's just pay attention to the careful choice of words which Miss Leonard uses in order to influence the opinion of these children.
For trashing the planet.
Trashing the planet, another charged word, and also, please take a note. Here, Miss Leonard is using a conclusion. Our personal opinion, presented as, which is a conclusion, she presents it as if it is a fact. We are going to see often that presentation of opinion as if it is a fact. And quickly we move on to the next slide so that we can catch up that we just have been blindsided.
What this looks like is we chop down the trees, we blow up mountains to get the metals inside, we use up all the water, and we wipe out the animals.
So all this, again, we have a conclusion presented as a fact.
So here we are running up against our first limit. We are running out of resources. We are using too much stuff. Now I know...
Mixing truth and half-truth. Yes, there are a lot of resources that are finite. However, people also find alternative uses for different resources, and people find use of resources that were considered not usable in the past. So there is much more to unpack than what Miss Leonard is telling. This is definitely not sixth grader discussion. This is more graduate level.
This can be hard to hear, but it's the truth, so we've got to deal with it. In the past 3 decades alone, 1/3 of the planet's natural resource space has been consumed. Gone. We are cutting and...
Interesting where these statistics come from. Unlike the tanks, which was easy to rebut, here I wish you'd quote our data.
Mining and hauling and trashing the place so fast.
Trashing again?
That we're undermining the planet's very ability for people to live here. Where I live, in the United States, we have less than 4% of our original forest.
Objection! So here we have one of my favorite lies in this presentation. What does she say? 4% of the original forests left. what would most people hear? 4% forest left. Therefore, we have rampant deforestation and we are pretty much out of trees. Let's see what the truth is. Let me pull here something. So, from Wikipedia, which is by far not a source to be considered to be to the right or even to the center. According to Wikipedia, as 2016, roughly 36.21% of the US territory has been covered by forests. That's way much more than 4%. It is interesting, this is one of the best examples in this video about lying by omission, where you tell the truth. Yes, only 4% of the original forests. But what does she not tell us? That actually we still have 36% of the entire territory of the United States fully forested. Our argument, to be presented in a different way, would sound something like this. Oh my God, people were dying left and right. Soon there will be no people left because only 1% of the people who were born 100 years ago are still alive today. That's horrible. Without paying attention that actually more people have been born since. And here, people will not catch that distinction, and now they will be alarmed, thinking that the United States, and by extension Canada, has been completely deforested, which is incorrect.
Left. 40% of the waterways have become undrinkable. And our problem is not just that we're using too much stuff, but we're using more than our share. We have 5% of the world's population, but we're using 30% of the world's resources and creating 30% of the world's waste. If everybody consumed at US rates, we would need 3 to 5 planets. And you know...
Please pay attention to the guilt-charging rhetoric, which is extremely inflammatory, because to say that one nation or one group of people is more responsible to the ills of the world, we already have seen consequences as that type of thing, and you are presenting this very quickly to young students who do not have the capacity to quickly figure out what's going on and respond back.
You know what? We've only got one. So my country's response to this limitation is simply to go take somebody else's. This is the third world, which some would say is another word for our stuff that somehow got on somebody else's land. So what is that?
So what Ms. Leonard is presenting here is again a rapid succession of conclusions, presented as facts.
That looked like the same thing, trashing the place.
Just to point out, it is a common pitfall for people when they argue to try to debunk all these conclusions. And usually your opponent can throw 1, 2, 5, 10, 15 of those, and you sooner or later will stumble somewhere, and they will think that they have won. Instead, do not try to debunk conclusions presented as facts. Simply say, this is not a fact, this is a conclusion, this is your opinion presented as fact. If you want to debate on this topic, please bring more concrete data and give me some time to do my own research, and we can sit together and we can talk.
75% of global fisheries now are fished at or beyond capacity.
Let me scroll back because that was a very interesting moment. What's wrong with this statement? If you fish at capacity, which suppose that's what you're supposed to do, so you have equilibrium of the population, you're getting just exactly as much fish as the fishery can bring, you are lumped here in the same category with those who go beyond capacity, which may be a problem, or you may have had a fishery which actually has overpopulation. You may probably want to bring it down to something more manageable. We do not know. Second, we talk about number of fisheries. Pay attention to that very useful manipulation technique when they talk about a number of things which may be of completely different sizes. Imagine if you have 10 fisheries, one of which brings 99% of the fish to the market, and the other 9 are bringing only the remaining 1%. When we say 75% of the fisheries, what does that mean? Is this the big one plus some of the small ones, or it is just the small ones? So you can end up with the exactly opposite conclusion to what the truth really is, depending on how the data is presented to you. So when we are talking about items or entities that can be of different sizes, we should not talk about number of entities.
Percent of global fisheries now are fished at or beyond capacity. 80% of the planet's original forests are gone.
Again, now it was 4% remaining only with the United States. Now 80% gone, which is like a 20% remaining in the world. The same manipulation technique, original forests, not what currently we have there and what the goal supposedly should be.
In the Amazon alone, we're losing 2,000 trees a minute. That is 7 football fields a minute.
So here there are two issues. Issue number one, this is the third or the fourth, I lost track of, assertions in a very rapid succession that nobody can keep track and actually in their mind while the presentation is going, nobody can keep in their mind accurate track and analyze and say, okay, this is correct, or this is wrong, or here's a lie by omission, or this is correct. So at some point, the listener gives up and just starts following the rhetoric. And this is one of the goals of such presentations. That was problem number one. Problem number two, 2,000 trees a minute. Sounds a lot, sounds scary. But how big the region she is talking about? Almost the size of Europe. Leave your backyard without care just for a few years. Come back and see what's going on, especially if you're in the Northeast. You see that nature knows very well how to take care of itself, and there will be trees back there that you didn't think that they could ever grow. So 2,000 trees a minute sounds a lot, but we don't know how many a minute grow over such humongous area. We need to get the proper data, and then we can say whether we have stable a number of trees, whether the trees are decreasing, whether the trees are increasing. So we have incomplete information aimed to direct us of a given conclusion.
And what about the people who live here? Well, according to these guys, they don't own these resources, even if they've been living there for generations. They don't own the means of production.
Here, it means that Miss Leonard has no idea about what property rights mean. But what is frightening is that Miss Leonard is passing incorrect assumptions, and again, her conclusions, without being verified, to young children at 6th grade, under the benevolent gaze of the science teacher.
And they're not buying a lot of stuff. And in this system, if you don't own or buy a lot of stuff, you don't have value.
This is absolutely incorrect. But then again, that will be topic of a different video. Miss Leonard just does not know basic economics. I'll direct Miss Leonard to read some Thomas Sowell, but let's leave it for that at that moment.
So next, the materials move to production. And what happens there is we use energy to mix toxic chemicals in with the natural resources to make toxic contaminated.
Manipulation number N. Some materials are toxic, others are not. Some products contain toxins. What is a toxin depends on what legislature and lawyers agree. When we talk about poisons, there is something called lethal dose. Lethal dose. You will be surprised how many eco-friendly products are actually toxic if they are taken in too much of a dose. As they say, the dose makes the poison. So that's yet another misrepresentation here by Miss Leonard. But another one is to imply that every production comes with producing toxic chemicals, which is unwarranted. And people can argue that we also are entering here psychological child abuse if you tell the young kids at school that everything that gets produced in the factory is toxic. I remember when I was a kid, I was very afraid that the Americans will come and drop the bomb on us. So let's keep politics out of school.
Products. There are over 100,000 synthetic chemicals in use in commerce today. Only a handful.
Remember, she was talking about toxic materials. Now she's talking about 100,000 synthetic chemicals. Does the number of different chemical compounds, which if we just look at organic chemistry, they could be infinity, does the number itself mean anything? No. But on the previous slide, she was talking about toxic chemicals. Now she's just talking about chemicals. How many people, especially those at the level of a sixth grader, will realize that we switched topics, that from toxic chemicals, now we're just only talking about chemicals, hoping that you will not catch the difference.
Of them have even been tested for health impacts, and none have been tested for synergistic health impacts. That means when they interact with all the other chemicals we're exposed to every day. So we don't know the full impact on health and the environment of all these toxic chemicals, but we do.
What she says is true. A lot of things haven't yet been tested because there must be a reason to test. Luckily, in our society, and I've been broadly taken, we have self-correction mechanisms. People find that a problem exists, they raise alarm, the problem gets addressed, and sometimes people end up paying up, or people change the way how they do things. As we go and as we evolve as a society, we discover new things and we learn to correct our methods. That does not imply that what we currently do is necessarily wrong.
Do know one thing: toxics in, toxics out.
Manipulation at its best.
As long as we keep putting toxics into our industrial production systems, we're going to keep getting toxics in the stuff that we bring into our home.
If she knew chemistry, she would know that that is not necessarily true. Even though it is manipulative here and it doesn't need to be addressed further. But when you break one compound, you do not keep its properties. So, let's people who understand science give presentations about science. And let's leave the activist focus strictly on activism and purely identified as such, as members of a party, for example.
Homes and workplaces and schools, and our bodies. Like BFRs, brominated flame retardants, they're a chemical that make things more fireproof, but they are super toxic. They're a neurotoxin. That means toxic to the brain. What are we even doing using a chemical like this?
Couple of problems here. First, presenting opinion as a fact. If we go, and I can leave that for you people to do at your spare time, but if you go on Wikipedia and you look at the brominated flame retardants, again to remind you, Wikipedia is not center or right-leaning source. Even on Wikipedia, of the BFRs, you see some are toxic and are being phased out, others are not, and there is a big dispute yet about third. So the things are not nearly as clear-cut as Ms. Leonard presents it here.
It's toxic to the brain. What are we even doing using a chemical like this? Yet we put it in our computers, our appliances, couches, mattresses, even some pillows. In fact, we take our pillows, we douse them in a neurotoxin, then we bring them home and put our heads on them for 8 hours a night to sleep?
I am very curious if Miss Leonard is alert or aware, if she's aware about tort lawyers, about tort law in the United States, and I suspect similar in Canada, and the desire of everyone to sue everyone. How would it be possible to have a multi-billion-dollar tort case and nobody to take it? If what she says is true, somebody would have been sued long ago, have been driven out of business, and that wouldn't be true anymore.
Now, I don't know, but it seems to me in this country with so much potential, we could think of a better way to stop our heads from catching on fire at night. Now, these toxics build up the food chain and concentrate in our bodies.
And keep just noticing that the fat guy above in the government keeps standing on every slide. I will let you wonder why.
Do you know what is the food at the top of the food chain with the highest level of many toxic contaminants? Human breast milk. That means that we've reached a point where the smallest members of our societies, our babies, are getting the highest lifetime dose of toxic chemicals from breastfeeding from their mothers.
It would be very interesting to see the source that she is using for this information. Is this an opinion presented as a fact, or is it something that we don't know? We need published data.
Is that not an incredible violation? Breastfeeding must be the most fundamental human act of nurturing. It should be sacred and safe. Now,
Please notice how long she stays on this topic, unlike some of the previous topics. The reason is for emotional effect.
Breastfeeding is still best, and mothers should definitely keep breastfeeding, but we should protect it. They should protect it. I thought they were looking out for us.
Remember, the government was supposed to take everything. No, the government is not supposed to take care of everything.
And of course, the people who bear the biggest brunt of these toxic chemicals are the factory workers, many of whom are women of reproductive age. They're working with reproductive toxins, carcinogens, and more. Now I ask you, what kind of woman of reproductive age would work in a job exposed to reproductive toxins except for a woman with no other option?
Again, we heard several opinions presented as facts. It would be nice, again, if somebody is to bring such a discussion. You bring the numbers, you bring the data, and let the others gather data, and a discussion could be made. And this is, imagine how stuff is produced for the 6th grade in schools. The amount of information that already got skipped over quite at a rapid pace, and now we are talking about conditions of workers in a bad management factory. Is this science for 6th grade, or is this class warfare?
And that's one of the beauties of this system.
Using the system in negative connotation.
The erosion of local environments and economies here ensures a constant supply of people with no other option.
Please notice the sound of the Arctic wind that is supposed to blow in third world countries.
Globally, 200,000 people a day are moving from environments that have sustained them for generations into cities, many to live in slums, looking for work, no matter how toxic that work may be. So you see, it's not just resources.
Again, opinion presented as facts.
That are wasted along this system, but people too. Whole communities get wasted. Yep, toxics in, toxics out.
That was number 2.
A lot of the toxics leave the factories in products, but even more leave as byproducts or pollution. And it's a lot of pollution. In the U.S., our industry admits to releasing over 4 billion pounds of toxic chemicals a year.
When we talk about poisons, again, the dose makes the poison and also the lethality. A number of pounds without knowing what actually is counted to that number means absolutely nothing.
It's probably a lot more because that's only what they admit. So that's another limit because yuck. Who wants to look at and smell 4 billion pounds of toxic chemicals a year? So what do? Move the dirty factories overseas, pollute someone else's land. But surprise, a lot of that pollution.
It is amazing the level of chutzpah, or the lack of knowledge, to present it as a malevolent act of businesses moving overseas once the business climate in your country has been made hostile.
Pollution is coming right back at us, carried by wind currents. So what happens after all these natural resources are turned into products? Well, it moves here for distribution. Now, distribution means selling all the toxic contaminated junk as quickly as possible.
Continuing with the manipulative language. In our loss-so-happy economy, do you know what a boon for a tort lawyer would be to find out that there is a toxic lead, toxic paint or something on a toy or a toxic product? Haven't you guys heard about products liability and billion-dollar lawsuits?
The goal here is to keep the prices down.
Of course, 6th graders have not heard about that, so they swallow everything at face value, under the benevolent view of equally agreeing science teacher.
Keep the people buying and keep the inventory moving. How do they keep the prices down? Well, they don't pay the store workers very much, and they skimp on health insurance every time they can.
Payment of store workers and health insurance policies in 6th grade science class. Whether you agree with these policies or not is a separate thing. Please notice the attempts for political indoctrination.
It's all about externalizing the costs. What that means is that the real costs of making stuff aren't captured in the price. In other words, we aren't paying for the stuff we buy. I was thinking about this the other day. I was walking to work and I wanted to listen to the...
Even the broken clock is accurate twice a day. So she is partially correct that the money cost is only a fraction of a cost for the things we buy. And actually, there will be much later on a very interesting revelation on this channel, and there will be some philosophical topics, and we will bring some concepts to make this thing much more clear. Yes, money is only a fraction of the cost of what we pay. However, what she says with regard to this presentation is completely false, and we'll keep seeing that.
News, so I popped into a Radio Shack to buy a radio. I found this cute little green radio for $4.99. I was standing there in line to buy this thing, and I was thinking, how could $4.99 possibly capture the cost of making this radio and getting it into my hands? The metal was probably mined in South Africa. The petroleum was probably drilled in Iraq. The plastics were probably produced in China. And maybe the whole thing was assembled.
Please pay attention to the spelling. Probably this, probably that. At least here she admits that she didn't even know what she's talking about. But the fact is we hear a lot of opinion present as fact. Although it is commendable that she's asking herself why an article of manufacture costs that little.
By some 15-year-old in a maquiladora in Mexico. $4.99 wouldn't even pay the rent for the shelf space it occupied until I came along, let alone part of the staff guy's salary who helped me pick it out, or the multiple ocean cruises and truck rides pieces of this.
So one thing that has to be pointed out, and why all this does not belong in science class, is that the price of an article, let's say the price of this radio, does not depend on how much it took to be produced. The price of the radio depends on how much a buyer is willing to pay for it. And in those cases that sometimes the buyer is willing to pay less than what the radio is worth for, then this is called the risk of loss. And this is where those big firms and capitalists that Miss Leonard doesn't like are the ones who have voluntarily put their money at risk, and they are the ones who will eat the loss.
Radio went on. That's how I realized I didn't pay for the radio. So who did pay? Well, these people paid with the loss of their natural resource space. These people paid
Opinion presented as fact. Inflammatory language as well.
with the loss of their clean air, with increasing asthma and cancer rates. Kids in the Congo
Same.
paid with their future. 30% of the kids in part of the Congo have dropped out of school to mine coltan, a metal we need for our cheap and disposable electronics. These people even paid by having to cover their own health insurance. All along this system, people pitched in so I could get this radio for $4.99. And none of these contributions are recorded in any accounts book. That's what I mean by the company owners externalize the true costs of...
This is a mountain of opinion on various complex issues, presented as clear fact, quickly glossed over so that the audience doesn't even have chance to pick it apart.
production. And that brings us to the golden arrow of consumption. This is the heart of the system, the engine that drives it. It is so important that protecting this arrow has become the top priority for both of these guys.